Hi guys, it's Yulia here, and I thought that today we could talk about something a little bit controversial, something that many people in the industry disagree on. Us trainers, we disagree on this. Many teachers do as well. So I thought I could tell you a little bit about why it could be a good idea to use your students L1 in the classroom, and then I'm also going to show you 3 activities that you could try and do with them, and kind of see for yourself and decide for yourself if it works for you, for your students, for your context, and for whatever it is that you're teaching them. So let's see, let's have a look. So using L1 in an ESL classroom, let's see. First off, let's talk about some reasons why we could and why we should give a chance to L1 in the classroom. And the first one, quite a big one, there is literally no sufficient evidence that proves that English-only instruction is more helpful or is more effective when it comes to language learning. This is something that many people believe. This is something that sounds valid, but literally there's no data proving that. So, it's a myth that we all believe. But at the same time, there is enough evidence proving that L1 translations are more effective for learning and retaining new vocab, especially if it's something like a Quizlet card when they get a word and its translation. And it's something that's especially relevant for lower level students. And then learning as a process, it doesn't only concern language learning, but any kind of learning. It's kind of you building up on what you already know. So when it comes to language, it's only natural that your students rely on their L1, because very often that's the only linguistic framework that they've got. What their brain does, again, quite a natural process, is it tries to relate whatever new information they get, trying to relate it to what they already know and kind of building up on that. So denying them using L1 is kind of taking the only framework that they have, taking the only scaffolding that they've got in terms of this away from them. And if their L1 already makes sense to them, sometimes making a simple comparison or quite the opposite, saying, well, this is how it works in your L1, but it's super different in English. Why would you take that away from them? It's only natural that they want to do it. Also, based on that, knowing your students L1 can give you as a teacher some insights into how to work with them and where their mistakes come from and what framework they are trying to relate that to, what they're working from. It doesn't mean that you have to be proficient in any way in the language that they speak. Knowing the basics, at least knowing which L1 they come from, and knowing the basics about the language could be very helpful for you as a teacher as well. And then you as a teacher could help them establish those links that might not be super obvious to them, but would be obvious to you once you're more or less familiar with their L1. And the final bit, most English speakers, they're not monolingual native speakers. Your students in the wild, unless they're relocating to an English speaking country, but even then, they're probably not gonna be surrounded by native speakers 100% of the time. And it's useful to show them how their L1 could be useful in that communication and how they could rely on it. So for example, in my class, for some time, I had an Italian and a Spanish students. So they were in the same class, they were working together. And sometimes when they were in the same group, they would resort to their L1 and kind of use a Spanish word here or an Italian word there to make themselves clear. And again, it wasn't an exam English class, it was just a general English class. And if that's a strategy that helps them, if they can, again, rely on their L1 to compensate for their lack of knowledge in English, and that would make sense to their counterpart, why not do it? Because that's a very natural scenario, that's a very likely scenario. Of course, we strive to give them the best knowledge and we want them to improve and we want them to eventually reach the highest level, but it's gonna take years and they can't just kind of not go anywhere and not interact with any people until they reach the confident B2, C1, C2 level. That's not always a viable option. Right. And so with that being said, let's have a look at the first activity that I thought I could share with you. It's you using online translation tools, so dictionaries, Google Translate, anything like that would do. Here's how it goes. So first of all, you do a normal reading, listening lesson, you follow all the stages, all that jazz. Once you're done with that, after the follow-up, you write a list of words from the text on the board, along with their translations. And for this, you literally put the words into your Google Translate or whatever tool you choose, and you give them the first option, and that's it. After that, you tell the students that some of those translations are accurate and they are gonna work, but then some of them aren't the best. And at this point, because they have read a text or they have listened to a text, they are more or less familiar with the context of the text. So they know, they could anticipate what those translations could be, so they should be able to spot the ones that are not quite it. With their partners, they need to decide which of the words were not quite accurate and how those could be improved, and suggest their better version for that. For feedback, you go over the answers and you ask the students to justify those answers. So why do they think that their translation was a better option? Why did they decide on that specific way of translating it and not anything else? And hopefully that would send them back to the text that they originally read and to the context that was created there. And then after that, after the language bit is over, you're going to offer them some reflection. So kind of looking into it on a deeper level and talking about why they knew it was wrong, what they used to help them and identify the right translation, if they used anything, because they could be relying on their own knowledge and kind of just suggesting a better option. And also thinking how that could be useful when they're not in the classroom. So if they read a text on their own, or if they see a word they don't know and they want to check what it means, but they're not quite happy with the translation because it still makes little sense. So kind of bridging that knowledge with the real life application of it. Right, so that's it. That's the activity. Very little preparation. You do have to be quite attentive in monitoring and like pairing them up and making sure that they do the right thing. But this reflection bit is probably one of the most important stages in the activity. Now, some of the considerations. First of all, good for any level. Even your LE1s could do this. Obviously, your choice of words will be different for them, but potentially it's something they could do. You wouldn't want to do more than 8 words. For lower levels, for like super low levels, even fewer words than that. But for higher levels, they could deal with longer phrases or even sentences if we talk about like B2, C1, C2 levels. Those guys could cope with a bit more of a challenge. So yeah. And it will work well with monolingual classes where you as a teacher share the same L1 as your students do. So for example, it's something I could do with my students back in Ukraine when I was teaching there. I'd probably not do it here because it's either all of them sharing the same language, but I have no idea about it, or all of my students could be speaking different languages. So makes very little sense to do this. And you need to be sharing the language with them because you need to be able to give feedback and to offer some reflection as well, and like some other ways of if they really struggle, you should be able to equip them with the tools they might need. So that's safer if you do share the first language with them. Right, now another thing that you could try and do with them is something called broken telephone reverse translation. And it's exactly what it sounds like. We all know the game, so it starts in the very similar manner. So you whisper a sentence in English to one student. Then that one student needs to translate the sentence into their L1, and they pass it on to the next person. So they don't whisper in English, they whisper in their L1. That next person listens to that sentence and then translates it back into English, and then passes it on to the next person. And then they keep going like that. So it's English, L1, English, L1, English, L1. And there are 2 options when you could stop with this. It's either when it's the last student, or if it's getting a bit too messy, and you can't control the crowd anymore. So once you know it's the time to stop, you ask the last student to give you the sentence, and they need to say it in it doesn't really matter which language they say it in. So it could be English or it could be their L1, and the first student needs to confirm if that was the right sentence. And then basically what you do is you compare the first original sentence with the sentence that they got, and you could you do a language feedback based on that. So you compare how they were different, why they were different, did it affect the meaning, was the grammar all right? So you do a normal language feedback situation from there. And then obviously some reflection after you've addressed that. You make them notice the gap, because whatever they produced, it's been through so many rounds of change and alteration that sometimes it gets lost in translation. So kind of addressing why it wasn't basically the same original sentence, and pointing out what could have been done different, what could have been translated in a different way, so that it would be a more natural sentence, basically. Then something to remember and something to keep in mind if you decide to do this activity. Again, it's good for any level. For low levels, you would just do words and not sentences. So you could do words or phrases, so the length of the text could be different. This could be done in monolingual classes where the teacher either shares or doesn't share the same L1 with the students, because essentially the final product will be that English sentence. Even if the last person didn't say it in English, you would just take it a step back and you would take the last English sentence that they had. So you would compare the original with the last English sentence that they had in that sequence. So it doesn't really matter if you share the language or not, because you're working with the English sentences. Now, your choice of sentences, some ideas where those could come from. So it could either be from a text that your students have already read or will be reading in the future. You could use it to feed them some language that you're planning to teach, and it could be a way of doing your test 1, if you think of like test, teach, test framework, and kind of see where they are, how they feel about the grammar. And then your feedback would be essentially clarifying the target language that you're teaching them. Could even be a student generated sentence. So you could ask the first student to write a sentence, show it to you, and then that would be the sentence that they work with. You need to be careful with this one. You just need to make sure that the first original sentence that they send out into the crowd is an accurate one. So make sure you double check it, make sure they show it to you. It can also be from an authentic text, obviously. Could be something from the news, something from a song, a quote, anything will do, really. That's that activity. Quite a simple one. It could be used at various stages of your lesson. It could be your warmer, could be your test 1, it could be your controlled practice, many ways to go with it. So yeah. And then the last activity is something called idiom translation, and it's exactly what you think it is, right? So for this one, you're going to give them a list of idioms, and you need to clarify the meaning. So you need to teach those idioms to them. After that, once the meaning is covered, you're going to ask them to find an equivalent in their L1, but it has to be an idiom as well. So they can't just kind of write the meaning of it in a sentence. It has to be an idiom. It has to be something that people really say. For feedback, they share what they've come up with, and they see if maybe somebody else was able to find a better option, something that was more appropriate, and then they discuss why some things were better than the other things, basically. And then for reflection, again, they could compare, they could see if they're similar, if they come up with different options. Some idioms wouldn't exist in their language, so that's also something that you could address, that like not everything you could translate. So sometimes it just doesn't exist, so you would deal with it in a different way. or they can discuss what it tells them or what it tells you about the culture. For example, I did this with a group of Spanish teachers a while ago. They were here for like CLIL methodology kind of course, but they also had general English lessons every day. So I did this lesson with them. And what they came to realize, they also, like, they never thought about it, but what they came to realize and what they told me as well is that so many idioms in Spanish are apparently quite religious. Like, they have to do with the church, with religious holidays, those kind of things. And we had a nice reflective discussion based on that. So it could generate some good conversations, and kind of, especially if you have students who come from different parts of the world, that could be a good way to introduce each other to their cultures and their countries. Right? And again, something you need to keep in mind for this activity would be, first of all, A2 plus and higher, because lower levels could struggle with idioms. Higher end of elementary and up should be fine with this. Again, it doesn't matter if you as a teacher share your students' L1. The activity could be easily adapted even if the students don't share the same L1. As long as you have more than one person speaking a language, they should be able to work in pairs. Or if everybody speaks a different language, just make them work individually. They should be able to figure it out, especially if they are A2 plus or higher. They should be able to cope with that. So, as long as either everybody works alone or everybody's got a partner, they should be fine. And because of that, it promotes learner autonomy. So because they can't rely on you that much, it's all up to them. That's going to make them, hopefully train them be better aware of their own language, and then also how English is different or similar. That's basically it. Those are the activities I thought I could share with you. If you're interested in this, if you'd like to look into it, you could have a look at this book. You could find good activities for different scenarios there. So just like I did right now, where it's you and all of your students sharing the same L1, then the students sharing the same L1, but you not speaking that language, or just everybody speaking a different language. You should be able to find some good activities, some good ideas to adapt from that book. So yeah. And you guys, as always, thanks for watching this. I hope you found this video useful. Please let me know what you think about L1. And have you ever used L1? Do you use L1 in your classroom? If so, why? At what stages? What do you do with it? Why do you find it useful? If no, why do you not use it? Again, is it like something that you strongly believe in, or is it just that your students don't seem to need it? I'm really interested, because this is a very nice discussion, and I feel like in ESL, it's been banned for so long. Like, I remember me doing my CELTA years ago, and our trainers being like, never, ever, 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 ever should you use your L1 in the classroom. Like, never. And I mean, again, yeah, CELTA is kind of a black and white situation. I do understand why they would tell us that. But then even post CELTA, there has been so much resistance against using L1, and even now, as I've said in the intro, even now many teachers oppose the idea of using L1. So I'd be interested to know what you guys think about it, and if you'd like to try any of the activities, or maybe you have tried something similar. So yeah, basically just let me know what you think. I'd be happy to read, and I'd be happy to see what you guys think. See you around. Bye.